Hi, everyone. I'm Pastor Deb from The Journey, and these videos are really meant as a resource that after we have our sermons, you can do some study at home and go a little deeper on the topic. We are in the middle of a sermon series right now called Rooted, and it's all about spiritual disciplines and how we use those disciplines in our lives to make room for God to work. So it's not the discipline itself that does the work, it is always God that does the work. And these are just tools we can use as we are taking time with God. A lot of our prep work for this is around a book by Richard Foster called Celebration of Discipline. This is kind of one of the go-to books on spiritual disciplines, and your cover might look different depending on what edition you have. I will let you know that I'm recording this on April 2nd of the year 2020, so we are in the middle of a pandemic, and so normally I have a quiet space around me to do these videos, but my kids are here. I'm working from home and they are running around, so you may get them in the background. But I thought that for today's topic, that's actually quite fitting. There was one now. But our topic today is solitude. And so I thought, what better way to talk about solitude than in a situation and environment, instead of me waiting until they go to bed tonight to do this in silence, to record this in the middle of those challenges that might be facing some people, especially if you're at home with kids, or even if you're an adult at home with other adults, right? We are suddenly in a situation where we are seeing people a lot more and some people a lot less. You may be in a situation where you're at home all by yourself, and even that takes on a whole other dynamic. So just to acknowledge right up front that, especially related to the topic of solitude, we may all be in different situations right now. And hopefully this will give you some tools that in whatever situation you find yourself, you can find some ways to practice solitude. So I want to start by just saying something about solitude, and that is this, and this is from Foster. Inner solitude and silence can set us free from loneliness and fear. And so think about that for a minute. Solitude is very different than being lonely. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are alone right now, the difference between solitude and loneliness is like an inner emptiness. And solitude instead is entering into that time intentionally and allowing God to fill us so we are never lonely in that time. Now, if you're in a situation where you're having a hard time finding any quiet or solitude, you may be just also feeling lonely. You may be really wanting to be filled and having a hard time finding space to be filled. So whatever situation you're in, let's take a look at this together and see what options we have. So I do want to point out that the Bible tells us all about Jesus taking many times in solitude. And so I'll give you just a couple verses that if you want to pause this video at any time and go look these up, or you could jot them down as a way to have devotion material this week. You could look at Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. That is when Jesus is spending time in the wilderness for 40 days. Or maybe look at Luke chapter 6, especially right around verse 12. And I never like to point to one verse, but say, go to that area and look at a couple verses ahead of verse 12 and a couple verses after, so you get the full situation of what's going on there. But this is right before Jesus is choosing the 12 disciples, and he takes time, intentional time, to go be alone and be in prayer with God. And there are several other places that you will see Jesus, just if you're looking through the Gospels, where he's always taking time to make that space, to be in solitude, to be with God, so that he is filled in that time. Now the dog's going crazy because the millennial just came. And so you'll see I still get all kinds of noises around me. So maybe you have noises around you right now, and to know that even if you do, you can still take time and contemplate and think about solitude and how it looks in your life. I'll also point out a big difference we're seeing right now. You may feel a little bit more like you're relating to the story of Noah and the ark. It's almost like a forced solitude. But to know that we can be intentional, even if you're in a place where you feel like, well, I didn't choose this. I didn't choose to be in solitude or to be in a situation where I can't experience solitude. How can you be intentional today, right now, or find a moment where you are intentionally saying, okay, this is the situation right now. I may struggle with it. It may have benefits. Whatever you're feeling in this moment, how can you say, I'm going to take this as a moment of solitude, intentional solitude with God? And so that might look like oftentimes we try to fill that space. Maybe it's turning the TV off for a little bit, or your computer, or your phone, or whatever it is you're trying to fill that space with, and just take that time to be with God. Now, I'll also point out, as you can hear my chaos maybe going on behind me, and knowing this, there were also a series of live videos on Facebook on our page, The Journey Church on Facebook, where I went live. If you want to see what it was like to try to find moments of solitude with kids, in addition to this video, you can check those out. Also, for devotion material, please know that through this whole series, there is a reading plan that's provided. That is found on our website, and you can see that in the link below this video. You can also check out the sermon on solitude for more information there. Now, one thing that's talked about actually in the sermon that Pastor Chris lifts up is this thing about the tongue. And believe it or not, Foster especially talks about how do you know when to talk and when to be silent. And that is so closely tied to solitude. Because oftentimes, if we are experiencing things like loneliness and fear, what gets out of control? Our mouth. And so you can almost use it like taking your temperature. What is your mouth doing? What kind of things are coming out of your mouth? And are you in control of those things? And so use that like a gauge. And some verses you can go to look at on that. You'll look at James in chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. He talks a lot about this idea of taming the tongue, being in control, and talks about it like the rudder on a ship, that something so small can set the whole direction, even for our day. You can also look in Ecclesiastes, and you may know this whole thing. It talks about a time to do something, a time to not do something. And in Ecclesiastes 3:7 talks about that, a time to speak and a time to be quiet, that there are both. And so what does that look like right now? As you may find yourself either surrounded by family members, whether it's children or spouses, or just living with roommates, whatever that living situation is, or if you find yourself all alone. How can you, at the end of the day, there's a prayer that's called the prayer of examine. And the idea is that at the end of the day, you think back over your day. So I would encourage you as a prayer practice and thinking about solitude, at the end of your day, maybe it's while you're eating dinner, or maybe you'd like to journal, you could write this down, or maybe in bed while you're getting ready to go to sleep. What was my day like today? What kinds of things, as I was talking to others, either on the phone or in person, how was my tongue behaving today? How am I feeling? Am I feeling loneliness? Am I feeling fear? And if the answer to those is yes, or you're seeing that you're out of control, don't get too discouraged, but to know how can you then take very intentional time of solitude, even if it's 5 minutes. And if you're saying, I don't even have 5 minutes, another thing that Foster talks about is finding these little solitudes, these little moments when you're walking from one room to the next. For me, I've found some time like when I'm making dinner. Now, sometimes the kids want to help with that and it takes twice as long, but that's just part of everything. But sometimes they are not interested at all in being in the kitchen while I'm making dinner. And so that becomes a time where even though I'm working on something, I have that moment of inner solitude, inner quiet. Sometimes when we hear solitude, we think of monks or people who go on retreats, and those are great things, right? If you can do that, if you can take time aside and go away or go on a silent retreat, they're all great options. They don't work right now in our situation. So how can you instead find little solitudes, little retreats? How can you take moments to care for yourself and just take moments and breathe? Sometimes you can do the wonderful thing of escaping somewhere in your mind, looking at a picture or old pictures of maybe a trip that you went on somewhere that you felt that inner peace, and remind yourself of that inner peace. So I'd encourage you to do everything you can to find moments of calm. And don't get frustrated if those moments get interrupted. If you're by yourself and you're saying, I have too many moments of calm, how can you be intentional about some of those moments? How can you say, I'm not going to try to fill this space for 5 minutes, for an hour. Instead, I'm going to sit in God's presence and I'm just going to let God fill me so that I am reminded I am not alone and I have nothing to fear. So, what can this solitude practice look like in your life right now? And actually take a minute and write down some ideas, because what happens is right now you might be thinking of something that you could do, and then you're going to forget it or you're not going to do it. So, what can you do? Write down some things right now that you can do today, that you can do tomorrow, that you can do this week. Maybe it's even, a couple times this week, I'm just going to sit outside for however long it is, whatever works with your schedule, and see what that looks like. This is how we experience freedom from loneliness and fear. It is Jesus that gives us that freedom, and we use solitude as a tool to allow a space for us to be filled and to hear that good news. And so I hope that this video is helpful to you. I hope that you maybe found some resources, some things that you can read this week in the Bible. You found some maybe ways you can pray or experience solitude. If you find yourself really struggling with this, please know that even in this time where we can't meet in person, that the pastors and staff here at the Journey are available to you. Again, check out that link to our website below this video, and that will give you our contact information, ways you can get in touch with us. And check out our Facebook page, as every week, several times a week, there are many opportunities to engage. So as you go today, go practice solitude and be filled with peace.